So trying to accommodate the best we could. There'll be some time for questions at the end for sure. But if we're in a slide and what you're curious about makes the most sense to ask then, let's just do it right in the middle of it. So if you have a question, maybe just get my attention and we'll answer those right as we go. What I'm going to talk about tonight, school finance in general, is really, really complicated. And so I understand that it's easy to kind of get lost in the weeds. It's not like your own budget at home. It's not like your own business. It's not like the business you run. It doesn't work that way. So, and we can talk about some of those nuances as we move through, but we're here to answer questions and just raise a level of awareness in the community about what's happening. And then also, like Julie said, there's a place at the end if you have ideas for us about how to, improve our budget situation. We're all ears. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is about our community's kids and our community schools and trying to do the best we can. So we're all ears. So tonight, I'm going to start by giving an overview of school funding, take a look at future budgets, talk about our budget reduction target heading into the next school year. I have FY25, and you'll see FY up there a bunch. Our fiscal year in schools, our budget year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So when we talk about fiscal year 25, that's the 24-25 school year. We're currently in fiscal year 24, the 23-24 school year. So that's something that we could keep an eye on. We'll talk about where we are in sort of the process and timeline, and then, like I said, I wanted to give time to answer questions and hear any ideas you have. And like I said, there's an opportunity to do that after the meeting too, if you would prefer to do that a different way. We're going to do that by working through some slides about funding, kind of a timeline that we have been working through the last couple of years. Take a look at some previous reductions that we've made, look at our reduction estimates and how those have shifted over time as we continue to learn more about where we're at with our budget. And, one of the things about school district budgets is that our budget literally changes from day to day. If we have a student enroll tomorrow or unenroll tomorrow, our budget changes, our revenues changes daily. So there are shifts that happen like that. And so we'll talk about some of that, talk about where we're at with COVID funds. I know that's been something that people have been curious about. Then we'll get into reductions, how that looks out in the future. So one of the questions that comes up often is where do school districts get funding from? And this slide kind of lays that out. Most of our money, most of our revenue comes from the state. A small portion comes from the federal government, and that's changed over the last few years due to COVID funding. If you rewind back to pre-COVID and fast forward to next year, those federal revenues will be similar. But in this span of time when we had COVID funds here, the federal money was a higher percentage than it typically is. Our taxes, 12%, that is what's funded locally, essentially. And then other local are fees and things like that we might collect at basketball gate or, that kind of thing. So the majority comes from state aid, and that's why when the state is not holding up its end of the bargain funding wise, it impacts us a lot because most of our money comes from the state. Taking a look at our revenues as a school district, this is what it's looked like the past 3 years, and you can see this jagged line. And again, on the right-hand side of the jagged line, it's fiscal 24. That's the year that we're in. Over here on the right side of it are estimates. On the left side of it are knowns. We have an audit that's done on fiscal 23. We know precisely what we ended up with revenues, but even though we're in February of this year, it's still an estimate to say where we're going to end up because our revenue changes daily depending on how many kids are here. And so that's what our revenues have looked like over the last few years. You can see again the proportion of taxes, other local things, a large amount that comes from state funding, and then that federal aid bar. Again, going back here, you can see this blue bar is a little bit thicker, that top one, because there's COVID money in there. But when we get back out to fiscal 26, that bar gets down to where it would have been if you saw the same kind of a graph in fiscal 19 or fiscal 18. So that's where our money comes from. That's what our revenues look like. On the expense side, this graph shows how much we spend and where we spend it. And if you can't see in the back, this blue bar represents salaries. It's in the, on the far right in the 55, 54 area. Over here, about 58. The, what color is it? Steel. Is in the 20s, mid 20s, 25, 26, 27 to the right. And then the green is all the other expenses. Most of our expenses are people. Constantly over 80%. And that's good. We're in the people business. Our money should be spent in the classroom and on people. The challenge comes when you are in a budget situation like we are, when you need to reduce budget. If most of the money that you spend is on people, when it comes time to cut large amounts of money, it's difficult to do that. It's impossible to do that without it affecting people. So that's where we've been the last few years. And the first few years of reductions, if you kind of get back here, you can chip away at the green, and we did. We chipped away at all the other things outside of the classroom to protect kids, to protect staff, but eventually, you can't, we have to pay the light bill. That's in the green. We have to pay to plow the driveways, the parking lots, and you can't really not do that. So eventually that green area gets about as small as it can be, and you really have to start focusing on that other area. That's what we've had to do the last few years. If we stack these up next to each other, this is what this looks like. And again, some of you in the back might not be able to see the exact dollar amounts. I think the important thing for you to notice is the dark blue is expenses, the green is revenues. And anytime we have the dark blue above the green, that's bad. That's deficit spending. That's not good. If we rewound back to fiscal 2016, you'd see more of that. It would be green smaller than big blue. The last couple of years, you'll see that we've turned that around. The green is larger than the dark blue. That's good. That was our goal, was to balance our budget. Because if we have a broken budget, the first thing you have to do to fix that is you have to balance it. You can't keep deficit spending. So that was the first thing that we did, set out to do. This shows if we don't make any more cuts, what happens, okay? So without making any cuts, you can see that the dark blue bar continues to grow and outpaces the green bar. And again, everything to the right of that red mark, red line, are estimates. Even though we're, 6 months into, 8 months into our fiscal year, these expenditures, these revenues for fiscal 24 are changing every day. The other thing that's unique about schools, and I'll talk about this maybe a little bit later, we have a limited ability to influence that green bar. Most of our money comes from the state. It comes from the state in a formula that multiplies an amount per student times how many students we have. Most of our money comes from that. We don't have the ability necessarily, at all, to change what the state gives us. They determine that legislatively. And we don't have the ability to create students. We can do our best job and try to draw students to ourselves. But in terms of, I can't produce more things or raise the price on the thing to increase our revenue. We're sort of the largest drivers of our revenue equation is really out of our control.
Hey, Matt, for context, could you lay out for us what is the population changing and or is the dollar per student changing across the green? Do you understand what I'm saying? So that just to give us the context of how you got to that.
That's a
63 million.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll probably have Kara chip in too. So back here, we're obviously talking about actuals, how many kids we actually had. We know this number, revenues and expense, revenues, how many kids, how much per kid. As we move forward, as soon as we get, and the amount that we get per kid is determined for fiscal 24. Because legislatively in the 23 session, they made a determination of how much it will be. They make that determination 2 years at a time.
And how does that compare to the prior year?
It's more. Yep, the state is giving more per kid at every single year. Yep.
Okay.
Now, we don't know what it is gonna be in fiscal 26, and we used to be unable to estimate it at all because there was no boundaries or minimums that the state had. Some years, I've been doing this long enough where I remember when when there was a 0% increase. That hasn't happened a lot, but it has happened. There have also been times when they shifted how much we got paid, so we didn't get all the money that we were entitled to in the year that we earned it, if you will. Now in the session in fiscal 23, they made some changes that create a floor essentially of districts will get at least this much, and then there'll be some indexing to inflation. But as soon as we get past, out to here and here, or to here, that number's unknown. So the other part of the equation comes into how many kids do we have, right? And so we take a look at demographics and go, how many kids are in kindergarten class this year? How many seniors do we have? Map that out year over year. And then we can also take a look at this year's seniors and look backwards and go, how many kids were in that grade when they were in 11th grade and then in 10th grade and 9th grade? So we can watch that progression of that group, that cohort, to see what happened. And we can see, do we pick up kids typically, or do we lose kids typically from kindergarten to their senior year? The big variable that isn't unknown to us is kindergarten, next year's kindergarten. We don't know how many kids will show up. Now, we have some estimates based on screening, preschool screening and kindergarten screening and those kinds of things. So this is the time of year where we're like, how many kids have come in and gotten screened? And we screen kids no matter what district they go to. That is a separate process. So not all those kids might end up here. Some might end up at St. Joe's, some might end up in Greenway, but that is a big variable. And when your biggest driver for revenue is kids times a dollar per kid, it gets tricky. So these are estimates based on enrollment and based on what we believe state revenue could be per kid, conservatively. We don't estimate 3% in new state money. We haven't seen that typically. So this last year, but again, going back as long as I have, that's not a number we've seen much. Kara, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do, because this green bar really jumps up from fiscal year 23 to 24, and the legislature came out and they said, we fully funded education. Well, that's not true. There were 65 new mandates for education that they implemented this past year. 65 new mandates for us. And part of those mandates cost money. So we have to spend more. So some of this money that we're getting that looks like it's wonderful, it's covering some of those costs. Something that started this past year is we have to pay unemployment for employees that work less than 12 months if they're uncertified. The state said we will give you a reimbursement for unemployment for 2 years. And I was very skeptical. I didn't think I would get it. But it turns out the state spent $40 million on schools the first year. So we will get it the second year. So that bumps that number up. The other big thing that happened is the state has never funded special ed expenses at a very significant amount. This year, they agreed that they would fund the unfunded portion by an additional 44%. I know that's a lot of blah, 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 but basically it comes down to, for every dollar of special ed, we used to get approximately 55 to 60 cents on the dollar reimbursed from the state. The rest of it came from general education money. The state now is reimbursing us, starting in this year, anywhere from 65 to 70%. So that's why that state revenue goes up. Not only is that state revenue based on number of students, but it's also based on expenses that we have. So they did do good things for us, but again, 65 mandates does take its toll.
So again, just to double down on that, you see a dip here in green, back to what Kara said about the unemployment insurance. We have to fund it here with state money that they set aside. We will fund it here with state money that they've set aside. That money will be gone here, but the expense will stay. So that'll be an expense that we have to pick up. And it's not, it's $300,000 to $400,000. It's not insignificant. Yeah.
So then, can you explain the same for the blue bar then, where we're getting increases in the blue bar and well, is that part of like these mandates and stuff, or?
Yeah, I'd say it's a combination of mandates, it's a combination of inflation, it's a combination of, up 83% of our costs are staffing, so the increased costs of staffing. There are some things happening in here with unemployment and sick leave that we have to pay for now that are escalating in here. So those all get kind of balled up. Kara, do you have any other?
Yeah, the insurance rate of increase, our consultant said was 8%. And we did change plans. So we're hoping that will slow the increase in our insurance costs, but that has to be part of our assumption. Matt talked about the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act. We are also going to have a new tax that we have to pay, 3.5%, for the Family Medical Leave Act, or I'm getting.
But that's starting in 2026.
Yes, but we have to, that's part of that year. So that too, and there's just,
The contribution to
yeah,
TRA is going up.
Yeah.
So those are all, and we, when we talk about 3.5% maybe doesn't seem like a lot, or even 0.5% change for a retirement account, maybe it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have that percent on millions of dollars, even a small percentage on millions of dollars can make that change. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. What is our present enrollment at right now?
Today.
Well, I mean, like this year, this school year,
I'm in a ballpark 3,900.
30 for the whole district.
K-12. Yeah.
Really? Only 39?
Yep.
Okay, second question. I think back on the previous slide, it looked like the people cost was like in the 50%, 55, 58%.
Just salaries, and then there's another 26% in
Okay,
benefits
so I was
too.
wondering where this 83% came
Yep.
from. That was a
Yeah.
little confusing.
Yeah, so, sorry about that. The teal or whatever color that is, this is benefits, this is just salaries. So you gotta put those two together to get to your total personnel.
Is there,
Good question. Yeah.
is there a projected enrollment number for next year, roughly?
Yeah, so when we work on setting our budget, we conservatively estimate how many kids will be here. Again, based on that cohort group moving through. Do we usually pick up kids or lose kids? We have some interesting trends in 318 about picking up kids or losing kids as they get older. But the big variable ends up being that kindergarten class. It can, every time we have there's a new kindergarten, we get excited because it matters. But yeah, that number isn't projected to change much next year. I think we're still at
Okay, so
ballpark.
it's gonna be about the same,
Yep.
roughly.
Are there open enrolled kids in 318?
Yeah, we are an open enroll winner. We enroll more kids than we open enroll out. And, if you talk to 100 open enroll people, you'll get probably one of about 4 different answers why they do it. Some of it is geography. If you are on Scenic 7 ever in the morning, you'll see 3 different buses on that road. You'll see a bus that's heading to Nashwauk and a bus that's heading to Greenway and a bus that's heading here. And so sometimes depending on where somebody lives, that affects their decision. It's simply about work. It can be simply about geography if they're just closer to the school that they want their kid to go to. Sometimes it's a choice about opportunities or sports. But it's kind of a hit or miss, but we are a winner when it comes to open enrollment. Are you saying how many?
How many? Yeah, both in and out.
It's about, again, I'm gonna ballpark this. We gain about 100, it's about 800 in, 700 out. And we border 11 school districts. We're the 3rd largest district in the state of Minnesota. So if you can imagine how 11 school districts around us, people are coming in and out based on how close schools are.
Yeah, the district's unbelievable. We have, the northeastern part of Lake Winnie is in our district. Those kids have to drive through a school district to get to ours. And they're closer to probably 2 or 3 other schools than ours, on the way up to Wirt and, in that area, or S Lake. A lot of, kids go to Black Duck and back and forth. Yeah.
Can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah.
I looked at the district maps. I don't get that myself.
Yeah.
There's some kids up Island Lake.
Yeah.
Elwood,
Yep.
how many people are we picking up around Elwood to bring to a 318 school?
I don't know the number, but I can tell you that, there were, over time, there have been schools, if you go back 70 years, there were schools scattered all over the district.
Squaw Lake.
Exactly, Balsam, so they were all over. And over time, as the number of kids that attended those went down and down and down, it eventually becomes really, really tough to continue to operate. And we still are obligated to educate those kids. That's our, state obligation. And so we have 52 bus routes, I believe, and put out 1 million miles on our buses a year.
I mean, isn't there a win-win for a lot of people though? If you worked with, I don't know, legislature or MDE, somebody say, hey, let's redistrict these boundaries here, because you could go to Black Duck, you can go to, Deer River, you can go to North Home, save a lot of money.
Yeah, if you think about the aid per student being in that, depending on how old the kid is, $10,000 to $15,000 per student. If we're picking up 3 kids in Altwood, and that's $30,000, that more than pays for that bus. So it's even with open enrollment, I've had people say, well, if your class sizes are so high, why don't you shut down open enrollment? Well, we couldn't do that. But like Kara said, we have 800 students enrolling here in open enrollment. If we didn't take any out of district kids, if you multiply 800 times $10,000, $15,000, that's the amount of aid we would lose. That'd be right off the green number. And we'd have to come up with that somewhere, or be able to scale back enough to be able to accommodate that. And what ends up happening is, if you take 800 kids, it sounds like a lot, but when you divide it up by 13 grades, it's not like you can take all of the expense out of one grade level or from one area. That's evenly distributed across the whole system. Yeah, but so in terms of redistricting, so I've had the question from people in areas of the district like that, like we want to secede from the district. What would have to happen? So there is a process that would require the new district voting yes, this district voting yes, and the county commissioners voting yes. And generally, there's interests there that end up competing and making it a bad business decision for one district or the other. Yeah, it's really, yeah.
So I just want to clarify, open enrolled kids, they get a bus ride from District 318. No.
No, some do, but we generally bus from the boundary.
Okay, so mom and dad would have to drive them up to point A, and then they can get a bus.
That's right. So if we don't, we don't necessarily run to, if there was a kid in, Hill City, we wouldn't run down and pick up that kid. They would have to get to the county road. There's a spot where our bus goes south. They have to get to that spot where we're already running to and meet a bus there.
Okay. The aid that you receive per student isn't impacted on whether or not they do receive transportation.
Correct.
It's regardless.
That's right. We get the same amount of revenue whether they get bused or not. Yep. But we're required to bus. We're required to offer that. Good questions. This is great. Okay.
I want to make sure you're out here by 10:30.
I know school finance can be good people to stay too, so you are all doing great. What happens with the money we get? It was interesting during the referendum that we ran this last summer and fall to hear some of the things that came up and questions that came up. And so with the money that we get, one of the things that came up with, well, the district should have a budget. You should have a budget. We do have a budget. The school board's required to adopt a budget. We do that every single June. It's the law. So we have a budget. And like I said before, we balanced the budget last year. And this isn't just Matt saying this. There's an audit that shows that we have to publish. So every June, the district does this, the school board does this. The district has an independent financial audit every single year. They come in and look at our programs, soup to nuts. They investigate some unique federal programs to make sure that we're accounting for every dollar that we get the way we're supposed to. Again, required by law, published, and if you follow the district school board meetings, you can see that that audit report ends up being in November, December, every single year. I mentioned that we had a balanced budget last year in fiscal 23 and fiscal 24. We did that through a combination of cuts and being really smart about how we used our COVID money. We hung on to as much of it as we could so that we could not have to do as drastic of cuts as early as we would have had to without that. We bought the things we were supposed to buy with COVID funds, but we didn't buy things that we didn't feel like we needed so that we could save them. And now the rest of the COVID funds I'll talk about in a second. They have to be spent by this September. And after that, you can't access those funds anymore. Our audits have come back good. The best report that an auditor can give is when they say it presents fairly. That's the cleanest opinion, and we've had that for a number of years in a row. So the auditors aren't coming here and finding all kinds of problems with our business operations. That's not our issue. This slide or set of slides is in your handout too. We have to go through sometimes a review by Standard & Poor's, S&P. Some of you might recognize that. They evaluate an organization. They do this with businesses and other governmental units. They take a look at stability, health, because at some point, if somebody needs to lend you money, there needs to be a standardized way to judge whether you're kind of your risk on this, whether you're worthy to lend money to. Our rating was recently upgraded from negative to stable. That's a result of balancing budgets, building fund balance, and having a plan that we're talking about here with continued reductions to continue to balance our budget. So that's good. We've been doing as much as we can with the money we have. We have less revenue per student than districts of comparable size and the state average. So we get less money than average. We spend less money than average. And our results, our scores, our MCA scores are, Kara mentioned, we have 11 boundary schools. Our results are higher than all of our boundary schools and higher than the state average. So despite the fact that we get less and spend less, our results are improving.
Why do we get less?
Well, the biggest reason why we get less is most school districts in the state have operating referendum. 70% of them. So when you throw that in, it really changes the dynamics. That's the biggest, it's the biggest reason.
And that's what failed this fall, correct?
And that's what failed this fall, yeah. We asked our community this last summer when we were preparing for that referendum, what do you think about how we're doing? Most people in our community said, you're doing a good job. You're being efficient and effective with our tax dollars. It didn't play itself out in November, or other things affected that vote for sure. But when we did the survey in June, most of our community agreed with that. So what challenges have we had? State funding, I mentioned that earlier, it hasn't kept pace with the rising costs of education. And if you listened back to what was happening in the 23 legislative session, both sides of the aisle acknowledged this. The Republican side of the aisle actually had a larger increase in state funding than what ended up passing. So they acknowledged that what we ended up with wasn't enough. The red side of the aisle. The blue side of the aisle that is in control in the legislature, we know that. The day after the bill passed, the leader of the Senate Education Finance Committee said, we did what we could do. This was great, but there's no way to fix 20 years of underfunding in one session. That's what the blue side said the day after that bill passed. So this isn't Matt's, this isn't Matt's opinion. You can disregard it. This came right out of St. Paul. And again, when 70% of our revenue comes from there, and they're acknowledging that it's not enough, that really affects us. What have we needed to do? We've reduced our budget by 7.4 million. They mentioned that 20-year piece. And like I said, we've done our very, very best with COVID funding and be smart with that as long as we could. But that's one-time money. When it's gone, it's gone. And eventually it starts to hurt. And districts all over the state are making reductions like we are, whether it's tied to this COVID piece or they're in the same situation where we are. Many districts were out this fall asking for support. Many districts are making reductions this spring. This isn't a 318 unique situation. Again, we're playing catch up for 20 years of funding. So why are we here? I get that question. Our revenues are less than our expenses, or have been. They're not growing at a pace that can keep up with expenses, and they're less under our control. Again, we can't influence our revenue number outside of writing grants, which we try to do. But again, we don't have, I don't have somebody around here who's the development director or writing grants. We have people doing that when they're able. We've been successful.
What about
in some
hiring
cases.
out for that?
What was that?
What about hiring out for that?
Yeah, so-
Companies that specialize in just that.
That came up last night in our board meeting. Our employee group said, we think that this person could pay for itself.
Yeah.
And so it's something we're gonna look at. It's a little bit of a risk, but a couple grants could probably get you there, right? You know somebody.
Might.
Maybe. Our expenses are greater. They're growing at a rate faster than our revenues. And again, Kara mentioned insurance. It's been a challenge for our school district for a long time. Been growing faster than we can kind of stay on top of it. That's why we just made a big change there with the help of our employee groups. The metaphor that I use is this barrel. People probably think it's silly, but I think it makes sense. Our revenue coming in, the spigot is coming in slower than this pipe at the bottom is letting it out. And inflation is trying to make that pipe at the bottom be big. Insurance costs are trying to make that pipe at the bottom be big to get money out faster than it can come in.
Assuming insurance costs, are you talking employee benefit insurance, or are we talking?
Health insurance
general
primarily.
liability?
Yep. So we, again, we through the negotiations process, our employees agreed to move away from a very great, rich, expensive health plan to a high deductible plan like many people nowadays are on. The challenge with that kind of a shift is that it's not like a light switch where all of a sudden there's all kinds of savings or that you can realize the full potential of the savings right away. This is about how people use insurance. And so it's really a long-term play, long-term thinking to do that. But we believe, and the early results, we have 3 months of data. We're 4 months in. The early results look good. That
I'm
it's,
talking self-insured.
we are self-insured as a school district. Yeah, we are self-insured. But we moved from a self-insured plan that was, no deductible, small co-pays, that kind of thing, to a high deductible, $3,000, $6,000 single family deductible plan with a savings account.
How much is, I'm assuming there's contributions.
There is. We're
to it.
contributing half of the deductible. Yep.
Do you go to market? Do you have brokers?
Yeah, so we're required, the state of Minnesota, through a law that was passed a number of years ago, requires school districts to go out to bid every 2 years on insurance. And so we typically get, we get bids from Blue Cross, Health Partners, PEEP, which is the state funded plan. Medica, I think we've got in the past, Preferred One, I think we've got in the past, and sometimes they will choose to bid on, sometimes they won't.
I know there's a lot of businesses and school districts that insure the employee, but the spouse, they have insurance in their business, they need to take it there.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
We don't have a policy or a practice of forcing people to do that. But it did happen a little bit when we made this shift to this high deductible plan because there was a deductible in place, and the first dollars the first dollars of expense in medical came out of the employee's pocket or their HSA. Some of them made that shift by themselves, but we don't have a policy or practice that forces people to do that.
What kind of turnover is there in staffing? Is there high turnover?
Not,
Everyone's-
not in our teacher group. No, in general, I'd say there isn't. We have some employee groups where there's higher turnover than others, but I'd say that turnover in those groups is similar to what other districts experience.
I would assume that you guys have something in play with those, contributions that you make to HSA dollars, for instance, that you are staggering that over the years so that they're not getting those funds.
That's correct.
Where they can terminate,
Yeah,
shortly thereafter.
yeah, we don't make the full amount right up front. We do it over the course of the year for that very reason. Yep.
This is our first year, so
Yeah.
we did it twice, but I told,
First rodeo.
yeah, it literally was, so.
Yep.
Yeah, we're gonna work on that.
Yeah.
It's a big shift for our employees for sure, and so we wanted to make it as kind of accessible as we could, but also to try to protect the district too.
You have a large number of people who are grandfathered to the old plan, so that you're gonna be carrying for your years to come, which are gonna keep those benefit costs high for.
Yeah, so all of our retirees are still on our old plan.
We do have a trust set aside for those costs, so they don't affect our general fund, the retirees, so we're lucky that way.
Are there any state regulations that stop school districts from working together for health insurance benefits? Because it's a numbers game. The bigger the pool that you're insuring, the more negotiating power you have.
Yeah. No, and actually there are pools in the state that some districts are a part of. So you're 100% right. It's a math game. It's about risk mitigation. So the service cooperative in Mount Iron has an insurance pool. And it has, I don't know how many school districts are in that pool. They have a cities, counties, and other government agencies pool that they do. And then the state has a pool, the public employers insurance program that it promotes that's large. We've asked that question of our insurance consultant, and he said at this point, it still makes sense for us to be self-insured, but I don't know how long that'll be the case, because it is ultimately about
You know,
risk mitigation.
One or two people with cancer.
Yep.
And that changes things very
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah, and we have, so we have stop loss, so that helps. Stop loss insurance helps with those really, really high claims at $300,000. So it's another type of, it's kind of like a ginormous high deductible plan, but we do have that in place to help with some of those really big cases, and even that's gone down a little bit. But it's a big expense, and you see, we're talking about our benefits being, half again what our salaries are. It's been an expense that's been tough on our district for sure, and not just ours. That's why a lot of organizations, not just our district, city, county, if you look at their history over the last, 10 years, changes they've made, it's all the same. Back in the 80s, insurance was cheap and everything looked different.
The other side of this coin is that the reason you guys have better test scores and retain your teachers more than a district is because of these benefits. It's the number one reason teachers want to be in Grand Rapids traditionally. And that's not necessarily be the case in the future for you guys. So that's the other side of the conversation of like, you could cut those things, but then who's going to stay? Who's going to be here?
It wasn't, that's 100% true. It was a big draw for people to come here and stay here, the insurance benefit. And it will be interesting to see over time how that plays itself out. You're totally right.
We're asking more and more of our teachers.
Yep.
That's the things for sure. People are doing more than 1.0 a lot of days.
We're getting less, but we've got bigger classes.
But honestly, the benefits that the healthcare that this district gave before that you got rid of it and retirees still get to carry today is not seen in the industry anywhere else. So you can say it's great, and it is. Lucky for the people that took advantage of it, but that is what can get business into trouble.
You bet it is. It's 100% true. Yep, it's 100% true. And we have a fringe benefit committee that meets. It's made up of representatives from our employee groups, and that was a tough thing for them to do because they had to look at the data, look at the facts, look at the money, make decisions that they knew were going to be very unpopular with the rest of their employee groups. potentially. I mean, looking at that plan, there are people, today that are appreciative of the change. Because, if you are healthy and there's an HSA plan, you have money that's yours at the end of the year, that's yours at the end of the year. But that's a big change, and, it was really expensive regardless. There's no argument with that. So it was an important thing long-term for us to do. That also affected the way that our negotiations played out with our employee groups this last round too, because we knew we were going to have to make a big insurance change. So that affects strategy and things like that.
One more question.
Yeah.
Silly question maybe, but annual wage increases, what do we look at on average for
Yeah.
for staff?
If we look back,
3%?
20 years, I'd say if we look back at 20 years or 15 years, the average wage increase, and I only know this at the teacher, but the other ones would be real similar, is I'd say 2 to 2.5%. If we look at that average over that 15 years. This year, it was a little bit more, again, knowing that we were going to have this big insurance change. And so there was a little bit more, but next year is more average. Yep. Because of the things that I talked about, we have limited options available to us to try to make those bars even out. We can get more kids, I mentioned that. We can hope for more state or federal revenue. We have zero control, a little control here, a little control here. We can cut expenses. That's the one tool in the toolbox that we really have control over. And you can ask voters for a local investment via referendum. These are the same options every district in the state has, all 330 of them. And so we've tried to use those the best we can. We tried number 4, that didn't work out. So again, we'll be, utilizing the third one. I mentioned along with this, most districts in the state have reconciled some of these challenges by having additional support. And us going to the community last fall wasn't our first, that wasn't the first kind of tool in the toolbox for us. It's not the thing we jumped at right away. We knew that we needed to do some work internally first, because we knew that there was a pretty tough tax environment. People are sick of paying taxes, and we get that. We get that. So we took that seriously. That's why we waited kind of as long as we could. And I think that's sad on the right. We spend less than most districts do. You look like you have a
I
question.
do have a question. It kind of goes back to 2021 when they reduced the levy.
Sure.
Okay. Why was that reduced? It sounded like in the newspaper article of the time, it was because you want to give taxpayers money. But then 2 years later, turn around and go, but we have a referendum we want to tax you on. It does, maybe I don't understand levies completely, but it kind of seemed like you kind of had a bird in the hand and you cut that back, and then you came back and asked for, seemed like more.
Carrie, you look like you want to,
Yeah.
dying to answer this question.
Well, we don't have any control over our levy. Our calculation is 39 pages long for our levy, and it's ridiculous. And it's based on the number of students we have, and the levy did go down. I believe it went down by 0.81%. And what happens is we look at our levy is based on 4 years of data. And the state goes back and looks at those previous years. And if there's adjustments in those previous years, then they do an adjustment in our levy. So that levy specifically was a long-term LTFM adjustment. And it had to do with when we opened our new schools and we sold and demoed Forest Lake, it had to do with the age of our schools. And I know all this stuff is like so super boring, but it all goes into the calculation of how much money we get from the state in our levy. So
we have a levy every single year, just like the county and the city do. Districts do. Kara mentioned we get a big giant packet from the state with 18,000 formulas in there that's driven a lot by how many kids we have. Most of the much of the revenue in there is for very specific things that we can't use discretionarily. An example is community ed, right? So, or LTFM, like Kara said. That money that we get in that levy for that one particular thing can't be used to pay for paraprofessionals or teachers. It can only be used on that certain thing. So like those tables in the back over there, community ed purchased those tables. We couldn't purchase tables like that. We couldn't use any old dollars to purchase tables like that. I can't use money from food service to buy cafeteria tables because it's physical equipment. I can only pay for food service workers. So our money is very categorical, especially the money in that levy. So we have a levy every single year, just like the city and the county do. That's the one you're talking about going down or going up a little bit. The big difference is the county each year can say, this is what our operational budget is. This is what we're going to set the levy at. The city can say, this is what our operational budget is. This is what we're going to set the levy at. School districts cannot do that. The state determines the maximum amount that a school district can levy for the things that the state says we can use that money for. So we don't have a lot of discretion there in terms of raising it. The state sets the cap. The city and county don't have that.
One of the biggest parts of our levy, because we don't have an operating referendum, is the debt service part of it. So the new elementary schools, we have a levy, a voter approved levy for those schools. That's on there, and that may change each year. There's a few other debt service for improvements, roofs, things like that had to be repaired, and those are also on the levy. So those will make a slight difference, but we can't take, for instance, the money we got for Southwest and use it to pay for teachers. That money can only go into improvements for Southwest, and that would be on the levy.
That's a great example. I know that was a question during the referendum. We just spent all this money on Southwest. Why don't you use that instead of cutting? You can't use that money for teachers and people. The money that was used to renovate this building was from construction funds. It was from the referendum in 2018. It could only be used on buildings, not people. You had a question back there.
Well, I was gonna say, during that levy change, I believe it's also when the middle school was paid off.
The what?
The middle school, original part was done. But, when we got the new chiller unit at the middle school, I was custodian there, and I actually mentioned to the building's ground supervisor, why are we getting a chiller unit when fractions on the dollar? I mean, we're talking like a third of the cost to have the whole chiller unit completely redone. Right there on the spot, instead of having to have construction crews come with cranes to remove the old unit, and our crew comes back later to put the new unit in, set it all up. I mean, we're talking over $100,000 spent on a new chiller unit, but it only costs us about $30,000 to $40,000.
Yeah,
I told them, why don't we get the old unit completely redone and use all that extra money to put LED lighting to
sure.
reduce our electric cost?
Yeah,
I was basically told I was a dumb custodian and didn't know what I was talking about. But I did years of construction prior to that.
Yeah, I don't know the details on that, but
Yeah.
I mean,
But I'm saying those are some of the issues that it's where the dollars are being spent per budget
sure,
needlessly, when there is some smarter ways to do it.
sure.
And unfortunately, like you say, some things are allocated for certain areas like
Yep.
roads and grounds, some things
Yep.
are for transportation, some things are for kitchen, some things are for, teachers.
Yeah. I'm sure there are decisions made, when evaluating that about return on investment and lifespan and all those kinds of things. That'd be my guess on that.
So if I'm understanding right, back to this levy thing, it sounds like the school board had no say-so over any of that? Because that's not what I was reading in this article.
So if you watch the process every year in, I don't want to say every district, but in most districts in the state of Minnesota, it looks like this. The business manager works to input data to MDE. MDE generates runs, what the levy's going to look like through the fall. And around September, the board will say, we have to approve a preliminary so that you all me can get a preliminary tax statement. So during that time, most boards will approve the maximum. In other words, they're saying, we want to have the ability to levy as much as the state says we can, because we know we don't get to go over that. So they do that in September. And then later in the fall, usually December, is when the final levy is approved, because that ends up, then you get your property tax statement based on what happens in December after the truth and taxation meeting. And at that meeting, the board makes a decision about what to do. Most times, most school districts will approve what the state allows them to levy. They can't levy more. They could levy less, but if they levy less, then all of a sudden, whether we're talking about a used chiller or a new chiller, that $30,000, we don't have the money to pay for that. We got to pay for that out of the general fund, money that we would have to pay for people with. So the board does have a decision of how low to go, but not a decision about above that.
So this levy thing that I read about 2021, that was whose choice to lower the levy? Was that based on the state said
It was
or-
based on what the state said we could levy.
Okay, and it was also based on input. So it is so deceptive. Like that levy amount changes every day. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that 39-page calculation, I download it every day because it does change. The state will get a change in market value or a change in a student or a change in a building age or just some minute detail and the whole levy will change.
The other thing that districts will do from time to time, or boards will do from time to time, if they can project that next year there's going to be some big thing that's going to influence the levy a lot, they might adjust so that they can level out that levy so people don't have this, rubber band thing going on. Up a lot, down a lot, that kind of thing. So sometimes there's adjustments or planning that goes into it, but most times, all the time, the state sets a cap on it every time. And that's again, a huge difference between how the city operates and how the county operates and how the school district operates.
Another silly question.
You haven't had one yet?
Referendum, going back to that. So is it possible instead of doing referendums and having a property tax, can we do a sales and use tax? No,
We're not allowed to
we're
do
not
that. No. We have a lot of handcuffs on us that other units of government don't. Yep. Yeah, that's one. So what have happened during our cuts? 70 staff, we've made cuts from virtually every single area of the district. There are some areas of the district where cutting staff doesn't help our bottom line. For instance, if we cut a cook, that doesn't help our general fund because we can pay for cooks. We do pay for cooks with food service funds. So, and I can't use food service funds to pay for a third grade teacher. But we've, whether it's the secretarial group, custodial, teaching, principals, district leaders, it's affected all groups. We've reduced the number of opportunities for kids, made cuts to courses, scaled back or cut arts. When we opened those new buildings, we had art. We don't have that anymore. You can see these here. We've increased fees, started charging community for use of school facilities. If you have kids in Pony League, something or other, you've got a way bigger bill for Pony League or Grava or whatever this winter than you had before, me included, because those entities are paying to use our buildings now and we haven't charged in the past. I don't imagine that in the back you can see this timeline. The purpose of me showing it and talking about it is just to ensure that that this isn't something we think about on the spur of the moment, but that we think about over time. So this is a slide that that I started showing a year and a half or 2 years ago. And it just goes through the process of our budget. In the fall, we're gathering data. In the winter, we're doing budget planning for the following fiscal year. In 22 spring, we made cuts for the next fiscal year. We had a balanced budget. In June of 22, we began thinking about referendum, budget planning for the next year, cuts, reductions, balanced budget. Last fall, we had an operating referendum. That was our plan moving forward. That's the plan we executed. One of the things that is unique about schools again, and referendums in specific, we can't do those whenever we want. There are 5 dates during the year when we can do referendums. The first 4 all have to be mail-in. That's the law. And we can only do 1 per calendar year. That's the law. And if we do it in November, it has to be on the general election day. That's the law. So the date that we picked last November really wasn't so much our picking. It was us doing it on the day the state said we had to do it. Otherwise, we'd have to do mail-in only. So that all comes into play when we're making decisions about that.
So how far in advance did the 2023 referendum, what, as far as paperwork, how did that, at what point did you submit paperwork to say this is what we want to do in November?
Yeah, so we have some notices that we have to file with the Secretary of State around election, and Julie probably might know those off the top of her head because she did all that stuff.
I mean, are we saying it's a year or are we
No,
saying it's?
No, it's not a year. We were talking about that and planning for it, like what would this look like? We were talking about it, thinking about it then, but in terms of the process itself, that's not till like the summer previous to November. It's like so many days before the election, you have to notify the Secretary of State, and then there's notices we have to send to people and that kind of thing. Yeah. Does that sound right, Julie?
That's exactly right. The board makes the final decision calling the election in August. But a lot of the work is done and the notices to the state are done in the summer prior to November.
We have a similar timeline looking out ahead. We're in this winter now. We're budget planning for fiscal 25. We're in the process of considering reductions for the fall. Our plan is to have our another balanced budget. And then we've had discussions about a referendum in the fall, but at this point, it seems unlikely that we're going to do that. It's not because we don't need the funds, but our community gave us a message very, very loud and clear last November that the community is not ready to do that. And we have some work to do before we can go out again. When we lose by 50%, that's like, we got work to do. So we've got work to do. Yep.
Is it something to consider a referendum?
Yes. Yep. Yep. We can use operating referendum funds for whatever we want. We could do that. And I'm not trying to be cagey here, but one of the things we learned in this, I think one of the things we learned this last referendum that it wasn't clear enough, that it was too complicated. And some of that had to do with strategy. One of the things we heard is we wanted to get our seasonal kind of cabin people involved in the cost or the payment, but that made the ballot question much more complex too. And so we learned some things, but we could say, you know, 3rd grade teacher, 5th grade teacher, and that may be what we need to do to get the support we need. Part of what the challenge we had was question 1 wasn't about adding anybody. Question 1 was to say, we need a long-term strategy to make these bars the same height. That's what question 1 was. And that's not very exciting to people to say, hey, we're going to have a tax increase to keep things the same. But that's what we were asking for. Because ultimately, again, we can't be healthy and stable as a school district if we have bars that aren't equal. And if we're adding people and hiring people, making this blue bar bigger, and we need the blue and the green to be the same, that would mean we need to ask for way more. So question 2 and question 3 on this fall's referendum were about hiring staff. Question 1 was about leveling up the bars so that we didn't have to cut anymore. Sue?
Don't you think, excuse me, that one of the reasons I saw, 2 of the reasons that the levy failed or the referendum failed was one, what the county did, you know, either you do this or increase your taxes 10%, and the rising cost of poverty level is high, and people just didn't have the money.
But I don't want to spend a ton of time doing an autopsy on that, but I will say this. We did many, many meetings in the community. And I heard from very few people that said, you don't need this. I heard from many people that said, I can see why you need this. I just don't think I can afford it. That's what I heard the most. And that, I get that. That's tough. We had property reevaluations. People in the rooms, property, values probably went up. That affects your taxes. Sales tax county, sales tax city. People were sick of hearing about taxes. I get that. But I also know as a superintendent, I don't feel like I'd have been doing my job if we didn't at least ask the question, right? I don't think the board would have been doing its job if we didn't at least ask the question.
What if that referendum process?
About $105,000. Yep. Yep. Part of that is, when you run it in an off election year, there's, the district's responsible for more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think that the majority of property tax owners, taxpayers would say they didn't want to help
Yep.
with funding.
Right.
It's just you picked the worst year
Yeah.
to have done it.
Yeah. No, it was, the timing was bad.
Yeah.
The person, I shared that information about the survey and the yellow and people feel, one of the things, he used a phrase, he said, there is tax hostility in your community.
It's funny when you talk about doing the work first before you ask the taxes, but hindsight, it's like, oh, we should have asked before the other people asked, and you could have got a yes. It's a couple years prior.
Yeah, Eric Colby.
Right.
Yeah, timing just hasn't been, in our favor. And, again, going back to when we can do this, I mentioned that, we can do mail-in ballots in February and April, and I can't remember all the dates, the last was August. We can do mail-in ballots then, which creates a whole different election dynamic, right? Like, people have to watch for the ballot and we can mail it in, and, or we can do it in November, which is gonna be a pretty crazy election by all accounts, the way it looks. And here's gonna be the school district kind of in the middle of that chaos saying, hey, so, again, it just kind of gets to this point of has our community adjusted? Do they know more, trust more, have more confidence? And can they hear us in this really, really complicated, contentious election time?
Like, spending money is very psychological. Because you have to be very calculated when you go asking for money.
Right.
That being said, is anybody looking at data from the county? What are property taxes going to do this year? Are they going down collectively? Because I think property owners are going to be far more inclined to say, yeah, we'll support this because, hey, look, my property taxes have gone down, 5% from last year, et cetera. So is anybody looking at that data from?
We're not right now, yeah. I know they just adjusted their levy, so I think part of it is seeing what their levy increases at the city and the county will do to property taxes. And part of what's complicated about that whole dynamic is like, property reevaluations and property taxes is a redistribution of taxation. Right? If they don't change their levy, if they had a zero levy change, then people's individual property tax changes are about a redistribution of who they're collecting the funds from. So that makes it really complicated too.
As far as why did the school district wait until the next year?
Until
to save themselves $105,000 for a referendum vote,
why didn't we do it in the previous year?
or this year? Like, say, we're not gonna do it last fall, we'll do it next fall.
Why aren't we doing it in 2024?
Why didn't we wait to do it when it was already?
Because of the same reason why we probably won't do it. I mean, we could still do it in 2024. Districts typically lose in presidential election years.
Well, and I think you mentioned a word too. I think there's still a lot of trust issues.
Well, and that's again reason to keep.
Between taxes
keep
and
at it.
trust.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like,
Yeah.
very put off by.
Yeah.
that.
And it's clear there's a lot of misinformation out there. That's the other thing, we have to go on offense a little bit more and talk about some of the things I talked about tonight. Our auditors are saying you're doing what you're supposed to do with your money. You've had 2 years of balanced budgets. We didn't waste money on this building that we could have spent on people. You know, the Murphy wasn't a $40,000 sale. It was a over $300,000 value proposition for the school district. We don't have litter boxes in our schools, like all that stuff. People run away with all that stuff.
Why has the district not sold the property bordering Brook Prairie?
Yeah, so that question comes up, and so the district owns the Houlihan property. I'd say there's a couple reasons why the district hasn't sold it. One is, if you look at the challenge that the city had in finding a place recently for housing or for the other activities that they've been involved in, or the county to find property for a jail, it's clear that property in our community, especially that can be used for, you know, large projects like that, isn't readily available. So, you know, L&M Distribution Center, pretty big deal for our community. The city had to work really, really hard to find a spot for that. So thinking about that property, looking to the future, it wouldn't be good planning on our part to not be in a position to hang on to that as an asset. That doesn't mean we wouldn't consider, you know, something that would be beneficial to the community, but this is my 4th year here. I've never been asked if we want to, nobody's come to me with an offer. I can say that to you. The second reason, let's see, that's the first one. I have 3 of these. What's that? Oh, yeah, thank you, Karen. Selling something like Murphy, the admin building, or that property is one-time money. That doesn't fix a structural budget problem.
But according, unless I'm reading it wrong, on the county tax information, it looks like the school district is paying $6,100 a year on taxes.
No, we don't pay property taxes.
Well, why is it listed on there as, and the rest of the schools that are actually schools, they pay $45 a year, which I get because it's a school. But that's property.
The $45 is like a stormwater fee that we pay.
Yeah, it's just
But-
kind of a
But
token.
we do not pay any property taxes on any of our properties.
Okay, because like I said, it's listed
Yeah,
on the county.
yeah, we
that you're
do
paying
not
taxes.
pay any property taxes.
And so you're hanging on to it as an investment?
In the event that we might collaborate or use it for an educational facility down the road.
But we already have facilities.
Yep.
What other facilities could we possibly
Maybe we
build?
maybe we build a vocational educational center.
The trouble we've had with referendums in the past 15 years, it's not very likely anybody's gonna vote for that. And it just seems, it was purchased before the new schools were even built. I don't know why, because I think when people caught wind of that, they were like, we won't vote for it if it's gonna be put
Sure.
there. And it seems like it's just sitting there, just get rid of it.
I have you had said that it's a one-time, bailout, right?
Yeah.
It's not sustainable. Totally get that. When we're looking at COVID money, that was a one-time helpful.
Yeah.
And it really moved us along until legislatures finally woke up.
Yeah.
So could it be a potential, I know it's not a sustainable bailout, but to limp along until they continue to fix the 20 years of not paying what they should pay? You see what I'm saying? Like, they can't fix it in 1 year. Is there a potential there to help us until they can fix the 20 years?
Yeah, like I said, I don't think that anybody has said that the district wouldn't consider, options there. A significant difference is we had 12.5 million in COVID money. Despite what, kind of like, if I go on the county site and see what they say my house is worth and I could sell for that, we couldn't sell that land for what the county says it's worth on that site either. So the number would be way smaller, but like I said, and I'll probably just leave it at that. The district's not opposed to considering or to discussing that. But at this point, we're seeing that as a really, really important asset that once it's gone for good. And it only helps us one time.
To buy something in the future that could cost way more in 5, 10, 20 years from now than what you're sitting on today.
And I know the district had to work really hard, previously on that. Let's see. Timeline. So these are what our reductions look like. When we start talking about categories, teachers are our largest group. Okay. The most people that were reduced came from that group. We have made reductions from most all groups. Food and nutrition, I mentioned, that one doesn't help our budget to make reductions there. So we made reductions across the board, 70 positions. And it's challenging. It's challenging. I look at school districts our size and how they're staffed compared to us. It's not even close. It's very different, very different. And we're making do. We're doing our best, but it's really challenging. It's wearing people out, I can tell you that. You had a question that I feel like I didn't come back to.
I'm a senior pastor at Community Presbyterian Church, so there's a lot of parallels with what I experienced in budgeting with what schools are experiencing in budgeting. And it seems what the referendum showed was the school operates in a silo, the county operates in a silo, the city operates in a silo. There's no coordination of like, oh, we need to ask for a levy for this. We need to. Yeah. So there's no coordination. There's factors that are affecting the school district that the schools can't affect, like housing prices, and that's going to limit new families coming in and new students, so that's not going to go up.
Right.
So it seems like long term, there's got to be some coordination of efforts and plans and long term visioning in the county, and if there's any hope to shift things significantly.
I agree. I think, back to timing and some of that kind of thing, I think that's something we have to think about as community leaders is, when the city is considering its budget, its levying, when the district is considering what it needs to do that might be significant, from a change standpoint, having those discussions to try to align that the best we can. Back, I comment about the middle school, when we made our last payment for that, internally, we look at our debt load and try to manage around that. But I think there are things we could do better from a collaboration and coordination standpoint. Some of that, I'm having a discussion on Friday with city leaders about housing and that kind of thing, because more housing, more people, more kids. We're all hearing about jobs potential in our communities, and we all know those people need a place to live. Otherwise, having an unfilled job doesn't help our community at all. We have to be able to fill a job, have a place for people to live. So, but I agree with you. In October, I'm sorry because I'm powering through some of this stuff, but I want to be as close as I can to timelines. One of the questions that I got a lot during the referendum was, well, what are you going to do if this doesn't pass? What are you going to cut? Tell us and that was challenging. To be honest, I didn't want to do that because I didn't want it to sound threatening, to be honest. And then when I did it, people said you're threatening us, and so it was tricky. But in October, I did talk about it publicly with the board at the October 9th meeting. We were looking at a budget target of $3 million, a reduction target of $3 million at that time based on what we know. And again, I hope you're picking up this theme that our budget changes from day to day. What we know in October is different than what we know now 4 months later. But at that time, we had the fiscal 22 audit that was done. Fiscal 23 audit was in the works. We had an adopted budget that was we were 3 months into an adopted budget. So still at the very beginning of that. I shared at that time that reductions would include curriculum, busing, technology, and activities, and that we would also, to get to $3 million, most likely need to do some other structural changes. One of those was potentially reducing educational space. At some point in time, if this doesn't get reconciled, we're not going to be able to operate the same way we are. Okay, that could mean closing buildings down. It could mean moving to a 4-day week. I learned last week that the state won't allow us to do that. They shut down all the applications for 4-day weeks. So that option sort of that tool's out of our toolbox, which is too bad, because I think more options is better than less. Moving east and west to grade level buildings, that means that one of the buildings would be K2 and one of the buildings would be 3-5, instead of having two buildings that are both K5. So that's a more efficient way to operate the school district from a managing class size perspective. So that's another structural change I shared as a possibility at that time, in addition to other additional activities and staff reduction. So that's what I talked about in October, based on the $3 million reduction.
Was Cohasset tied into that?
What's that? Yeah, so, I mean, when we're talking about reducing educational space, that means operating fewer facilities. Looking at, you know, again, when we're back to the 4 things that we can do to control our budget, making reductions is one. It's the only one that we have. And at some point, that becomes part of the discussion is, can we operate all the school buildings that we're, can we afford to operate all the school buildings we're operating? And so, yeah, Cohasset was a building that was talked about, that we would look at closing as part of that potential.
Okay, Cohasset. I was gonna mention this. Okay, they just put school district, I don't know how much money into just redoing that whole building. Tons of money.
Mhm.
Okay. Set that one aside, which people are not gonna be happy in the Cohasset area, because that's part of the reason they voted.
Of course, yeah.
And then to have it taken away.
Yep.
Also, I think there's around 300 kids at Cohasset.
Yep.
How can East and West absorb? Let's just split it down the middle, 150 kids apiece. There is not room in those schools. I worked in East, and those rooms were jammed to the rafters. There's not even enough lockers for more kids.
Yeah,
How
I
could
mean,
they absorb those kids?
they would have to. I mean, I can tell you that during COVID, we
There's
had
no
five,
room.
I can tell you that during COVID, we had 5 sections of K1, 2, 3. We don't anymore.
I know we
We
don't.
have 4 sections. So there's probably 8 sections of empty rooms there or space that we could free up. It wouldn't be easy. There'd be more kids in a room. I mean, that's all part of this challenge, folks. None of this is easy. There's no easy like layups here. Like we're going to do something that's ideal. When you start talking about shutting the school down, and I'm speaking from experience, I've done it. It's no good. But nobody goes into a plan, you know, or a time when you're adding on schools like that or refreshing things, thinking that we're going to be in a spot half a dozen years later when we're talking about something that's significant. But we're far from in an ideal situation.
When we had 5 sections at least, if you walked into that room, if there had been one child in any grade that was in a wheelchair, I don't know where they would put them, because if you put them by the door, then nobody would be able to get out. If you put them over in the corner, they wouldn't have been able to get out themselves. There was no walk room.
Yeah.
Those rooms were so jammed with desks. It was
Yep,
insane.
I'm not going to disagree with anything you're saying, but it would
So
be
I
easy.
just don't know how they could put more kids in a room.
That's what we would need to do. That's all I'm saying.
Is the 4-day week option out just indefinitely or just the next year or two?
Yeah, so I mean, I try to kind of stay up on things as a superintendent, and I pride myself in doing a pretty good job of that. And so I wasn't aware of this change, partly because I know Black Duck's on it, Lake Superior's on it. There are some schools not that far from here that are on it. And so in order to move to a schedule other than a normal 5-day week, you have to make an application to the Department of Ed. And I pulled up the application, and right on the application, it says MD is no longer taking applications for schools wanting to switch to a 4-day week. And I went, what is this about? So I called down there and talked to someone that works in that division department. And she said, yes, during the Dayton administration, they had questions about efficacy, and there was a moratorium put on new schools or new districts coming onto a 4-day week new, and we shut it down. And every commissioner and governor since then has supported that moratorium. So at this point, it's absolutely not an option. There is a bill that is going to be introduced that would give boards the authority to do that. But the same bill was introduced last year and it went nowhere. So it seems highly, highly, highly unlikely that we would be able to do that, to have that option.
Do you propose that you do that on the Fridays if that's the day that they're not open, like on Mondays? How the community's adjusted or where are all the kids?
It varies from community to community. In some communities, there is an organized effort to work with YMCA's and Boys and Girls Clubs. Sometimes an organization will come in and run programming out of the building, like activities and stuff for a fee. In other communities, they're just like, figure it out. It's kind of a little of each. Yeah.
Did they stress at all or say anything about why they stopped?
What I've been told is that there were concerns about the impact of a 4-day week on achievement. And I don't know that the research supports the concern about that based on what I've read. And it's unique in Minnesota. I think we only have 6 districts on it. In Colorado, I think it's 40% of the districts are on it. It doesn't, our estimate is that it would save us $300,000 or so. It's not like a miracle. It's per year. Yep. And that's every year. Primarily you save on transportation and subs. Those are the 2 places you save. And, some of the other benefits, I'm talking about something you can't do. So,
What about a hybrid model then?
what's that?
What about a hybrid model then? If we're talking about saving on transportation, and subs, a hybrid model for, COVID taught us as a society that we can work remotely.
Yeah.
We can school remotely.
Yeah.
Is the hybrid.
Same. The state would have to approve it. And I'm not sure that, the one unique model that people have done, is, that has gotten some approvals is, year-round options where they run 45 days on, 15 days off. I don't know how that jives with, how people up here would think about that, because I've learned people really like summers, my life. But it happens. It happens. Yeah. Sue?
Just from an historical point, I was on the school board 17 years. And, regarding the 4-day week, I'm glad it didn't happen because childcare is huge. I think kids really need to be in school. This is where they got the best learning. Scores did go down because, they weren't able to be there. Some kids flourished under that method. Other kids that had parents that weren't there for them the whole time, were behind it. They really got hurt. So in the daycare, City tried doing something over at the Civic Center. That they're trying to find a way for their kids. So there's no daycare. And regarding Cohasset, there was talk when I was on the board about closing it, but we wanted to pass the bond referendum. We were really nervous. Cohasset's a high-performing school, the best elementary we've got. And we thought, we're going to get the support of the community if we keep it open. And it only passed by 60-some votes. So there would be a huge lack of trust in the district if we close Cohasset.
That's a great school. Again, I've gone through that and it's no fun. It's no good.
I don't think anybody's arguing that it's a good school. I think any option that there is painful.
Yeah. All the options we're talking about right now hurt in some way or another. All right. Negative Nelly for an hour and 25 minutes. We've had some wins in the last few months and we were due for some. And so I want to talk about some of those. We completed our audit and kind of dialed in our picture of where we were at the end of the fiscal year. We did a good job of holding tight on our cuts. We did a good job of holding tight on our budgets. And that helped where we ended up. We came in better than we expected to. That's good. That meant that our fund balance improved. Now, we've been using COVID to sort of supplement what we're doing there. But at the same time, we executed the plan that we set out to do. We have a more accurate picture of our COVID grant balances. Again, we got $12.5 million at the beginning, and there's a slide here in a second that'll show that breakdown. We anticipated having we didn't anticipate having a whole lot of COVID money left to use by September of 2024. That's the cutoff. Okay, uses that money past that. Because we did well with our execution of our budget, that meant that we didn't have to use as much COVID money to support our budget, which meant we have more money left to use through September than we expected. That's a good thing.
Now, is that money that we have more discretion on how to use them?
Yeah, yep, we can, Kara's very good at being creative without having to go to jail. Keep our auditors happy, I don't wanna, but no, we
But
can,
it's considered
we can-
restricted funds, correct?
what's that?
That's considered restricted funds.
Yeah, so we can use it, for instance, we can use that money to pay health insurance premiums, and then the money we would have paid for health insurance premiums, we can have freed up to do some other things, so, we can do some of that. We had a interesting thing happen with compensatory revenue. So compensatory revenue is money that we get from the state based on a free reduced percentage. Now, during COVID, we learned that when there's free breakfast and lunch for kids, we have a harder time collecting the forms from parents. And when we don't collect the forms from parents, our compensatory revenue goes down. We lost millions of dollars during COVID when we didn't collect forms. Millions. Coming out of COVID, we put some unique things in place where parents fill out the form, they get a free pass to activities, and that didn't affect our activities attendance. Actually, more people came because, you know, parents came with the kid, and so it's win-win-win-win-win. So anyway, we got our compensatory back up, and this last session, the state said, we're going to do free breakfast and lunch for kids again. And all of us in schools went, well, what about the forums? What about compensatory aid? Because if we lose that again, it's millions. And how do we make that up? The state said, we're going to hold you harmless. You're not going to get less money. Well, okay. There wasn't clarity, and generally how the state does that hold harmless is they hold you harmless at the district level. So last year, or this current year, we got $3.7 million in compensatory money. So we were budgeting that next year we'd have $3.7 million in compensatory, holding harmless. Last spring, we had to send out letters to families to say, because of our need to be staffed as efficiently as we could, we had to change or eliminate or reduce the amount of moving around in our district that we had. So we sent out letters that said, we're sorry, families, if you live in the East Elementary boundary, your kids need to go to East. If you live in the West Elementary boundary, you need to go to West, because we needed to be able to plan and be able to staff efficiently. Well, what happened when we did that, the building's enrollment changed, and East Rapids free reduced went down, and West Rapids free reduced went up, and Cohasset's free reduced went up. And then the state said, the hold harmless we talked about wasn't at the district level, it was at the building level. So East couldn't get less money, but because West's went up and Cohasset's went up, we're going to collect more compensatory money for East or for West and Cohasset than we anticipated. Yeah, you're going, oh my God. So yes, it's how, so that was an unexpected thing. And when we're talking about, you know, few $100,000 here, $300,000-$400,000 there, it's all of a sudden going, okay, this stuff is, oh, okay.
That's $400,000. Just to put it in perspective, 2 years ago, when we collected compensatory aid, we got 1.7 million for our, let's just round it, 4,000 students. Next year, we're getting $4.1 million just for people filling out the forms and turning them in. So when I talk about this, I'm like,
She gets all excited.
he doesn't do that, but like $400,000 more going into our budget when they said hold harmless, that's huge. That's really
Yeah.
exciting.
It's
So are
good.
those forms no longer going to be needed then?
Yes, we still need the forms. That's the silly part of it, right? So we still need the forms, and we're still going to keep doing the thing. You fill out the form, you get the free pass. We're hoping that that becomes part of the rhythm of school. Like kids go back to school, fill out the form, even though I may not qualify anyway, I don't care. I'm going to fill it out, and our community just gets used to that because those
Then that
forms.
initiative is still needed.
Yes, yeah.
Something.
And our schools have responded awesome. We have our schools are collecting 97% of forms. Like West Rapids, I think, collected a form from all families but like 9. There's 600 kids that go to school there. So they did just a great job. Our parents, just amazing. So that was about as excited as I get. I was excited. The other thing that happened, the other win, so we have a program called ADSYS. That's one of our intervention programs. Kara mentioned earlier that the state increased how it's reimbursing us for special education. This program qualifies for the same reimbursement. That was an unexpected increase in revenue. So $200,000 there. Interest revenue is higher than expected. That wasn't a lot of money. The other thing that happened, and Kara mentioned this earlier, one of the things that changed is that unemployment piece. We have to pay unemployment on our hourly workers that don't work in the summer. The state set aside money in a bucket and said, when the money in the bucket's gone, you're on the hook for it. We didn't budget because we didn't expect for that money to last 2 years. We expected it to be gone in 1. It's going to last 2 years. That's another $300,000 to $400,000 in money that's going to be available to us. But if you remember back to that bar that I showed, that green bar going down in fiscal 26, that won't be there. But in the 25-26 year, we'll have that. So again, we've got $400,000 here, $300,000-$400,000. So we have a few wins piling up, which is good.
It's good that you don't have high turnover then for unemployment reasons.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, so all those little wins are my arrows. Those things looking forward, you probably can't see these numbers, but this is a graph of our fund balance. Fund balance is like our reserve. In Minnesota, the average across the state is 20%. So if you think about right here being where the average school districts are, back in fiscal 16, we were there. The green line is the line that we use for our metrics. The yellow line is a line that the state uses for its calculation. Our board has a policy that our fund balance should be 10 to 15%. It was 18% in fiscal 16. It got down as low as in fiscal 22 to 2%. We made cuts. We were smart with COVID. Fiscal 23, 5%. We made cuts. We were smart with COVID, and we're expecting it to be 7% at the end of this year. It's a little bit, it can be counterintuitive that we're making cuts when we have reserves, but the 2 things we have to do to be healthy, 3 things we have to do to be healthy as a school district. 1 is balance our budget. You have to be balanced. 2, you have to get your reserve to a acceptable level. We're not quite there yet. And the third thing is we need we need a revenue increase. Okay, we have to be long-term there. So those are the things that we have to do, but it's good to see this bounce back a little bit. We need to get to 10, and you'll see in a second how our board is planning for that. I mentioned COVID. We have more left over than we expected back 2 years ago, so that's good. We're going to be able, that'll help us with our cut number. This is how we've used it over time. You are all being like super gutting this out. That's good. I mean, we're at 1.5 hours now. So you can see how we spent it over time. We didn't blow it all the first year. We didn't blow it all the second year. We tried to be real judicious in how we used that. We knew that this was going to be something we could use to help our budget if we were smart with it. But again, it has to be spent by September. All right. This is kind of the sheet that's got the hardcore. If you're into spreadsheets, you like this. So this is what we're looking at. This is what we're basing our numbers moving forward on. This is included in your packet on the back. A few things I want you to notice. First of all, at the bottom left, it says fund balance health. I mentioned that we have to build our fund balance if we're going to be healthy and stable as a school district. If we're going to get to a place where we don't have to cut anymore and people cannot have to worry about their jobs, we have to have a healthy fund balance. For us, that's 10 to 15% of our expenses compared to our revenue. So our fund balance. So we've included in our budget designating money to restore that. If you were to dig back into the details of our referendum, we had set aside $650,000 of our referendum revenue to do that also, because we know that's important in order for us to be stable. We have to budget to build that balance back. You can see at the bottom, This is the operating and surplus and loss. It shows 1.128 million. That's our projected deficit if we do nothing. Again, that changed from 3 million because of the unemployment, because of the COVID, from all that. That's good. You can see if we move out to the next year, it gets worse because our COVID money's gone. We can't use it anymore. So during our referendum, when we were planning for that in August, September, October, this number we were expecting to be a year ahead. But if you push out, you can see, our referendum question 1 would have generated 4.6 million in revenue a year. That would have helped us with that bottom number. These numbers to the right don't include any cuts. So when you see us in a minute talk about cutting 1.2 million, that 1.2 million will come off our expenses, help those numbers moving forward. But the bottom line is these numbers don't get better on their own. We're going to be back making reductions in a year, and we're going to be back making reductions a year after that, unless there's some significant changes that we can't predict right now. Up at the top, that big change, that federal aid, you can see that's in purple. I don't know what color it is on your sheet, if you can see it. That's the COVID money going away. That's why it goes from 3.8 to 2.1 million. We don't have any more COVID money. We can't spend it after September. This benefits line, we talked a lot about benefits costs. This is a big unknown for us. I talked about the change of insurance. We've estimated 8% increases. That's what our consultant is saying. That's industry average right now. Our first 4 months look good. That could, if our insurance plan saves us money, that could change that. And we're hoping over the long term it does, because we need that trajectory to slow down. It's just been growing too fast. So that's an area where we look at on this sheet, if you want a little bit of sunshine and optimism, that's a line that could change by significant digits if our insurance turns around. At the bottom, again, it doesn't look great moving forward. We knew that. That's why we came to the community in the fall, and why we're at some point going to have to be back again, because it's not going to fix itself. And like I said before, most districts have already done that. We'd be joining the majority. Let's see. So questions on the sheet? I know it's a lot. It's 840. Yeah.
On the fund balance, they're budgeting 650,000 each year.
Yeah.
What is the actual balance on hand of cash right now?
Well, cash and fund balance for us are two different things.
And is it restricted or unrestricted? So restricted meaning, is it spoken for like a retirement account set aside or those kind of variables?
I'll let Kara talk, because she'll be right.
Yeah, I'm not telling you right. I'm gonna use round numbers again.
Okay.
So our unrestricted fund balance is what we use, and that's what the state uses to measure our health.
Okay.
They measure all districts the same compared to our expenses to fund balance for that percentage. What we're adding to is our unrestricted, because
Okay.
that's the one we can use if we have a catastrophe. Like, we need to be able to rebound. We do have reserves, but those are set aside for specific purposes, like roofs and improvements and caulking on the schools, like things I don't know about. But the unrestricted is what is most important to us, and that's where that $650,000 we planned at.
And what is that current balance at? Are we talking 10 million? Are we
No,
talking 80
goodness,
million?
goodness,
2
goodness.
million?
No, actually, okay, so I can tell you when our fund balance was 2%, it was less than one of our payrolls. So it was less than $1.6 million. Our payroll twice a month each time is 1.6 million. We didn't have enough fund balance to cover one payroll.
That's what I'm asking is.
Yeah.
How much timeline is there to cover the monthly expense?
Yeah.
There's
And
not much overlap there.
no, and the state doesn't help us at all, because the state, when they say they're gonna give us, round numbers again, $50 million, they only give us 90% of that or less. The rest they give us in October, November, and December. So we're supposed to budget on that and cash flow ourselves on that. the state's not helping us. They're not giving us that 10% until much later in the year.
Due to the revenues coming in from the state and Fed at those varying times, does the district ever have to borrow money to cover its expenses?
We have not had to borrow money since I started in 2020. And with our fund balance increasing right now, I'm hoping we don't have to.
But most school districts have had to at some point.
And that would be detrimental on
You bet.
any district if you got to start paying interest on
Yep.
$1 million.
Yep. Yeah, if you're doing cash flow borrowing, that's not good, because yeah, it's millions of dollars at a time. Yep.
This might be a really good question, but are we allowed to have that money in an account that makes money?
Yeah.
Yep.
Do we take advantage of that?
Yes.
Okay.
I look at that, I'm sorry, Matt. I look at that nearly daily, our investment accounts, and try and maximize our rate of return. So, right now on our like main account, it's over 5%. Isn't that amazing? Like, I wish I could put my money in there.
Right.
So, and like
That's great.
cash,
Right.
cash that we have available to invest is different than fund balance. Fund
Yeah.
balance is the money that we're
'Cause that has to
cash
come-
plus, that's right.
it has to come and go.
That's right.
And then we're able to take those funds and then we keep them reinvested, so to keep them.
And part of it is we need liquidity there. I mean, we're not talking about long-term things that we can let it sit there for a couple of years. That's,
Those are term deposits, right? That they go in and they come out and then new money goes in. It's like a rotating.
Yeah, we have a
Doesn't
sweep
grow and
account,
grow.
yeah, that I work with, yeah.
so, all that said, you saw that 1.1 million in October. We were estimating 3 million in cuts. We've had some wins. Our cut number at this point is 1.2 million. That's the number that the board has directed me to bring to them, to bring back no less than 1.2 million in cuts. And to be honest, 1.2 million cuts for me in a $60 million budget 5 years ago isn't nearly as challenging as it is after you've cut 7.4 million. There's not fat around here. We don't have too many of anything around here. Looking ahead a little bit, I mentioned in here that if we execute on our plan for fiscal 25 that you saw, our fund balance is projected to be at 8% for fiscal 25, so bumping up another 1%, working on that, $650 a year, building that back. Our deficit at this point is estimated at 2.7. If everything happened exactly the way that we predicted and our crystal ball was perfect, in a year we'd be reducing 2.7 million. That's what that means. But there's lots of unknowns as we look to the future. Fiscal 26 is a budget year for the state. So in 2025, and that's spring, they'll be deciding revenue for us. We don't know what that is. That we'll also be negotiating contracts with all the employees in the entire district in a year. And so we don't know how that's all going to turn out. We don't know what's going to happen with health insurance. We don't know what's going to happen with enrollment. We can make really good estimates, really good guesses based on trends, but those are all unknowns. And that's why, we see some of this moving and why, even though some of those, changes are, changes can be good or bad. We've had some good ones. It's still hard when you can't just put your finger on something and say, guaranteed it's going to be this. I'm a math major. I like absolutes and saying that, that's not how this works. The process, I mentioned the board directed me to bring back reductions no less than 1.2 million. We know, and I've made a promise to them that I'd bring back more than that for them to look at so that they know what $2 million in cuts means, because anything that we cut now is going to help us in fiscal 26. Then there's a lot of philosophical sort of gymnastics that you have to do around that. We could cut, the board could say, cut 4 million this year, so we're not going to make any cuts next year. We could do that. There'd be a lot more people that would be out of work. There might be some people that we would let go that wouldn't have had to been let go. And that's that middle kind of challenging spot that we want to be in, because we have a lot of great people doing great things for kids, and we want to keep them as long as we can. We've been doing a lot of meetings. Our admin team's met 4 or 5 times. Our union groups have met. They brought back 3 or 4 pages of ideas for the board to take a look at last night. I'm hoping that you'll, give me some feedback. Maybe we'll just use the form because I know it's getting late, or you can catch me afterwards. I don't want to keep it too late here. The goal is to have our final reductions, at the end of this month. And so timeline is, and that's about a month earlier than we normally do it. But our employees were like, if we're gonna be let go, we want to know early so that we can look for jobs and that kind of stuff. And it's hard to think about that, but I understand it and respect it. And so it makes this timeline challenging, but that's our goal at this point. Principals will have lists, pretty finalized lists to me, 2 weeks from today. And then the board's gonna adopt a budget in June, a balanced budget. Okay.
We discussed all evening about the way to bring a balanced budget about is to remove positions.
Yeah.
Very simplistically, isn't another option to renegotiate contracts with the union employees?
Yep.
To where they take a pay cut in light of the fiscal issues that the district's facing?
That is an option. It hasn't been one that's been, received. Yeah.
And I understand. I understand that.
It's at 9% inflation, and that they're gonna go 18% backwards. There's no one that's gonna stay in the profession.
I served on a college board for 12 years. And 2 of those years were as the treasurer. What? 2 of those years were as the treasurer.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Very difficult fiscal years for that college. What we did was went to the president, said, what kind of pay